It is June 2018 and these are the memoirs of Pamela Allen, nee Crawford. They were written in September 2013 and we're currently, myself and Dad, Bruce Anthony Allen, Tony Allen, we're at 33 Meecham Way in Karrinyup, and this is Sean Allen here, first son of Pam and Tony. Here goes. As written by Pam. I was born in Brookton at the local hospital and delivered by the resident doctor. At 9 months, I developed whooping cough. This was a time when there were no triple antigen injections for newborns, no medicine to treat most diseases, so treating the symptoms was all that could be done. It would have been a worrying time for my parents, but with their care, I recovered. 15 months later, Kay was born, and we stayed in Brookton until 1941. We then moved to Perth. Dad joined the army and was posted over east, and Mum managed a block of flats in West Perth where we lived. 1946 to 1947. Dad returned from the east and he and Mum bought a classic old home at 4 Lock Street, Claremont. It stood on a large block with a tennis court on one side and a large mulberry tree in the backyard. The house had an iron roof, and from the front door a passage ran down the centre with rooms either side. We lived on one side and Mum rented out the rooms on the other side to a family who became friends. The house had high ceilings with an ornate plaster rose around a central light, and one night there was a loud bang and the ceiling rose crashed to the floor in a cloud of dust. Kay and I started schooling at MLC, Claremont, which is Methodist Ladies College, and caught the bus or walked to Stirling Highway to catch a trolley bus to school. I had a friend at school whose mother had a small car with a dicky seat in the back. The book opened backwards, or the back opened backwards, not up, and there was a small seat, and sometimes we got to lift to school this way. Number 4 Lock Street is still there, but the tennis court has been sold and a house built on that land. MLC was our only school, and we attended from grades 1 to 10, or the year we sat our junior exam. The junior certificate was very important to have a good pass to show a future employer, as I did, or go on to year 12 to gain entry to a tertiary institution, as Kay did. I sat 8 subjects: English, French, German, Maths A and Maths B, which included geometry and trigonometry, history and biology. I passed all 8 subjects and the results were published in the West Australian newspaper for everyone to see. The exams were not sat at school, so we went to the university or a hall in Claremont and were supervised by independent people, so they were very impartial. MLC was one of the first colleges built in Perth in the early 1900s, high on a hill in Claremont, backing onto the Swan River, and the grounds ran down to Stirling Highway, where the sports oval held our athletics carnival. These were fun days with lots of races and cheering on our team. We were encouraged to learn and study to achieve a good standard of education, and were told, your parents are paying good money for you to be at this school and deserve the best result from you. There was pride encouraged in the school, and the song was sung at assembly at the end of each speech day. The lawns in front of the school building sloped down to Stirling Highway, and opposite was St. Louis School. And we used to say, keep your legs together as those St. Louis boys have binoculars and will look up your skirt. Little did I know then that I would fall in love with a St. Louis boy at 17, and today we are still married 52 years later. One other event on the school calendar was the head of the river rowing between the boys' colleges. It was held in the river near the Swan Brewery. We would watch from the river's edge along Riverside Drive, and Hope Wesley, our brother school, won. Today the girls' colleges compete in their own head of the river. Dad and Mum bought a grocery and greengrocery business at 320 Onslow Road, Shenton Park, with a brick accommodation behind where we lived. The only toilet was down a path to the back of the block, and when I got my new bike, the one and only, I rode it to the toilet. Mum and Dad worked this business together, with Dad going to the markets, where Harbour Town is now, and buying fruit and vegetables. He had weekly orders for customers which he delivered onto the kitchen table. No one locked their houses or cars then. These orders were on credit, as were other goods in the shop, and I presume payday was when these accounts were settled. Mum worked all day, 5.5 days a week in the shop at a time when wives rarely worked outside the home, and was the constant one, always with a smile for customers, and then there when we came home from school. There was a butcher shop next door, and his meat dripping through brought a plague of rats into our shop, and I can remember Dad and Mum running around with brooms whacking at rats, and Kay and I watching from a distance. The rats ate the glue off labels of cans of food, so we couldn't sell them, and for months guessing what was in the tin we were opening: fruit, baked beans, spaghetti, etc. Kay and I continued at MLC from here and caught the train from Shenton Park Station to Swanbourne, and I walked over the hill to Stirling Highway and MLC. There were many Scotch college boys on the train, as their school was at Swanbourne, so the train trip was never boring. When Kay and I were about 8 and 10, we had many holidays in Brookton. Mum put us on the train in Perth, and we travelled by York to Brookton, where we were met by Grandma. No fear of stranger danger then. Grandma and Grandpa lived in a large house in town and had a farm nearby. Grandpa was one of the early settlers in the district, coming from South Australia in the early 1900s. He had the Shell agency, and the business premises were in between their large house and the small home they lived in originally. In the yard behind the agency were stacks of drums of fuel. Out the front was a petrol pump worked by hand. Grandpa was also an auctioneer of farm machinery and had a large brass bell which he rang to start the auction. I have this bell, and it is still in good condition. Kay and I wandered into the bush picking wildflowers or down to the river to catch tadpoles, which we left in a jar on the tank stand, where they promptly died. We went to the farm to check out the wheat and sheep, and Grandpa often swore at his dog and sheep, and Grandma would say, "Not in front of the girls." He smoked a pipe and often put it in his pocket before it had gone out, so had many holes burnt in his coat. Grandma had a pianola, or piano, which had rolls of music, and when a roll was put in the piano, we pedalled hard and the music came out and the keys went up and down as if we were playing. We made friends with some children who lived in the town and caught up with them every holiday. Uncle Moss was Dad's older brother, and he married Muriel, Auntie Moo. He was 6 foot tall and she was barely 5 foot, and they lived in the little timber cottage where Grandma and Grandpa first lived. Auntie Moo was famous for sponge cakes, and the mixture was beaten by hand, no electric mixers then. No one was allowed to touch the mixture as the sponge would not rise. During the war, Uncle Moss was away with the Air Force, so Auntie Moo worked the petrol pump by hand. There was also a spotter for unknown aircraft, but any time one went over, she was talking and didn't see it. Their 2 daughters, Karen and Maureen, were born after the war, so are quite a bit younger than Kay and I. A few days before our wedding in February 1961, and that's Tony and Pam's wedding, Uncle Moss died suddenly of a heart attack while on his farm. He was 49, so it was a great shock. Mum and Dad travelled to Brookton for the funeral, which was one of the largest funerals Brookton had. Moss was very popular. Auntie Moo lived in Brookton for many years, then moved to Perth, where she lived till her 100th birthday, but died a few months later. When Dad and Mum needed a holiday, they had no relief while they worked the shop, so after many years, Onslow Road was sold and we moved to a house, Taylor Road, Claremont. Kay and I still travelled down Stirling Highway to MLC. About this time in 1950, Jill was born. I was 11 and Kay was 9. A popular place to go swimming was the Claremont Baths on the Swan River below Bethesda Hospital. We loved swimming there despite the brown jellyfish, man-o'-wars we called them, which were always in the river. We'd buy a few lollies to eat as we walked back to Stirling Highway to catch the bus home. There were plenty of crabs in the river, and Dad used a friend's boat to go onto the river and catch crabs, and he'd cook them in a kerosene tin on the beach. We played around and then feasted on fresh crabs. I must have eaten too many as I was sick and can't face shellfish even today. Another favourite holiday was at Wallcliffe House, Margaret River. It was a large 2-storey home on a dairy farm overlooking the Margaret River, near where the river flows into the ocean. The house was built by Alfred Bussell for his wife Ellen. It was passed down to my uncle Brian Terry, who married Mum's sister Sue. They had 4 daughters, Jane, Angela, Dinah, and Suzette. And it was these cousins who we played with. There was no electricity at Wallcliffe as it was a long way from town, so large Tilly lamps were used for lighting. Uncle Brian was a dairy farmer and we helped our cousins feed the calves at the dairy while the cows were being milked. We ran from Wallcliffe through the bush past caves which the Aborigines believed had bad feelings and wouldn't go there, and onto the ocean to play in the sandhills and paddle on the beach. It was a carefree childhood and has left me with a great feeling of nostalgia. Wallcliffe was eventually passed on to Jonathan Terry, a first cousin of Jane, etc., until he came ill and it was sold out of the family. Sadly, in November 2011, a bushfire raged through the area and the original house and improvements made to it and original furniture were burnt to the ground. It was over 100 years old. In 2013, it is awaiting insurance claims to be either rebuilt or the land sold. What a tragedy for anyone who loved Wallcliffe and a great heritage loss for WA. A note is that at the time of this reading, which is 2018, nothing much has been done with the house. It's still in partial blackened ruins. Then Dad bought a grocery business in Cottesloe on the corner of Eric and Chamberlain Streets. Again, we lived behind the shop. Kay and I walked to MLC Cottesloe in the 50s was the best. Not a yuppie, wealthy suburb like today, but a working man's suburb then. We walked over one hill to the beach and it became our playground where we met all our friends. We swam all the Christmas holidays and body surfed over the reef. We could hire a black inflatable board which made surfing easier. To get a tan quicker, we were sprayed with oil which made us burn then peel. No fear of skin cancer then. On Friday nights, a group of us would walk to the movie theatre on Stirling Highway at Cottesloe and of course walk back. Mum never learned to drive and Dad didn't drive us anywhere, so we walked or caught the bus. In 1956, I started work at the Bank of New South Wales, now Westpac, in Perth on the corner of St George's Terrace and William Street. At first my job was clerical, sorting other bank cheques and every morning taking them to a clearinghouse where they were handed to staff from the other banks. I learnt all the basics of banking and became a ledger machinist, which debited cheques from customers' accounts. I also learnt typing. One of my superiors played hockey and invited me to join her club. We trained on the Esplanade, so at 4 p.m. on 2 afternoons a week, we changed our clothes and walked down William Street to the Esplanade, where we ran and hit balls to each other. Today, Colin Barnett, our Premier, is digging the esplanade up to build high-rise apartments, which makes me so angry because the esplanade was heritage listed early in the 1900s for the people of Perth to have a place to meet. This was a time of full employment, and everyone either worked or studied for higher education. There were no unemployment benefits anyway. Perth in the 50s was a big town, not a city, with no traffic lights, so policemen controlled traffic at major intersections at peak hour. The Narrows Bridge wasn't built, and the Swan River flowed right to the base of Kings Park, where the Mount Hospital is now. There were lovely shops, as the fashions were very pretty and smart. Summer dresses were shoestring thin straps and very full skirts with masses of petticoats underneath to make the skirts stand out. Shoes had very large pointed toes and narrow heels. Clothes weren't cheap, as there were no Targets or Kmarts, so we often made our own dresses, and shoes were repaired at the bootmaker, not thrown out when worn as we do today. About this time, I made my debut, which was an English tradition of coming into society. It was really just a white ball gown and with a male partner going to a ball with my school friends. It was a good night. Early in 1957, I was invited to Ken Wilson's 18th birthday and met Tony. We danced that night, but I went home with my girlfriends. A major party such as an 18th or 21st was always held at home, with a dance floor hired. Music would be records, a keg of beer and soft drink, and a photographer to record the night. The young men would wear a suit and business shirt and tie, and the girls a pretty dress. No casual jeans. Tony and I went together everywhere from then on, and had a great 5 years of going to the pictures, which we called the movies, dances, parties and weekends away. I met his family and friends and often made a group and went out together. Dancing was big. Dances were held at Canterbury Court in Perth, now demolished, Kings Park Tennis Club and the University of Nedlands. Jiving was popular, and Tony and I jived together. This was a time of Elvis Presley, Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, Gene Kelly, just to name a few. The Beatles came in the 60s. Every winter, the main businesses in Perth had a ball, and we went from one to another. We dressed up, Tony in a dinner suit or a tuxedo, hired, and me in a ball gown. The embassy in William Street near the Bank of New South Wales was the main venue for balls. We had no car, but Tony's mother, Connie, lent us her Morris Minor, and we went to a ball. We weren't allowed to drink until 21, but as we neared that age, were rarely questioned, and everyone drank and drove. No thought of choosing a skipper. A Marine Parade Cottesloe, opposite the Indiana Tea Rooms, was the Lido, a cabaret. We went there on special occasions. There was dancing and good entertainment. One number which was played was Golden Wedding, a great drum piece, and when it was played, everyone stopped dancing to listen. Jackie Harrison was the expert at this on the clarinet. Tony started playing hockey for the Old Louisians Hockey Club with young men from his school, St. Louis, and this created more social events as well as watching games. Tony came from a very close family. His Auntie Grace, Uncle Mervyn, cousins Jen, Wendy and Mervyn lived in the next street, Louise Street, Nedlands. His mother's friend, Wiggs Nichols, lived opposite in Vincent Street and often had parties, singing around the piano and enjoying each other. We would call him there after the movies. It was a great finish for the night. There was no television, so people made their own fun. Tony's brother John was going out with Prim Walker, and we spent a lot of time with them. They married a few years before us and have 3 sons, Michael, Bradley, and Grant. They were together for about 20 years, then separated and divorced. Sadly, John died in his 60s of a brain tumour. We still have contact with their sons and also Prim. Tony's mother, Connie, loved cards and we often played canasta and Scrabble. Rottnest was a favourite place to go for a weekend and we stayed in a bungalow, swam at the basin, drank at the hotel and went to the pictures in the hall. Much the same as young people today. Pictures at that time were often war movies such as The Dam Busters, The Battle of Britain, etc., or musicals such as Oklahoma, South Pacific and My Fair Lady. There was no sex shown, only kissing and always a happy ending. This was post-World War II and everyone wanted to feel good. We felt very safe going out, no fear of being punched as of today. There weren't many places to eat out, only fish and chip shops, hamburger shops, or a supper bar for a late night coffee or hot chocolate. No McDonald's or Red Rooster. Then the Italians serving their pasta on like spaghetti bolognese, etc. in Northbridge, and it became very popular. Tony would get a craving in the evening for veal cutlets and spaghetti and would drive to Northbridge to enjoy it. There was a caravan parked on Marine Parade between Cottesloe and North Cottesloe called the Van Eileen, and it sold hamburgers, fried onions, eggs, etc., and was a landmark for a long time. Also on Stirling Highway, Netherlands, near Tony's home, was Cookie's Supper Bar, and we often called in there for a hot chocolate in winter. Another popular supper bar was Bernie's in Mounts Bay Road, Perth, near where the Mount Hospital is today. In 1959, Dad sold his shop as supermarkets were starting in Perth and outpricing the corner store. He and Mum had a block of land in Hawkstone Street, Cottesloe, and built a lovely brick and tile home there. It was luxury after living behind the old shop. In 1960, I had my 21st birthday in the new house, and later that year Tony became engaged. Television had just come to Perth, and Dad bought a set and we watched everything. When the TV was switched on, a test pattern was shown on the screen so people could adjust the contrast, etc. before viewing. Of course, a remote control was unheard of, so if we wanted to change the channel, there was only ABC and Channel 7 to start with. We had to go to the TV and press the channel button. People stayed home and picture theatres suffered, but when the novelty wore off, people went back to the movies. In 1961, Tony and I were married and rented a flat in Broadway, Netherlands. I continued to work at the Bank of New South Wales until mid-1962 when I left to have Sean in August. We had bought our first home in Landon Way, Mount Claremont, for £3,500 or $7,000. It was a small 3x1 home and a great start for us. It is still there today and from the street looks exactly the same and now valued at $1.3 million. When Sean was born, I was thrilled to have a boy as there was only girls in my family. Then in 1964 we were clever enough to have another son, Stuart, who grew into a very cute baby. Then in 1968, another delight when Christine was born. There are only boys in Tony's family, and Christine had 3 boy cousins and 2 brothers, so was definitely outnumbered. So no, Tony and I had our own family, and I feel truly blessed to have a good, loving husband and 3 wonderful, healthy children. To anyone interested in reading my story, I tried to create a picture in Perth from 1939 to the early 1960s, so you could imagine how times have changed compared to today. I felt a lot of nostalgia in remembering my early days and enjoyed recalling people and events now long gone. From now on, Sean, Stuart and Christine will recall all that happened as a family, so I will leave them to pass on all they remember to their families one day.